So I will try to link my work to the theme of this event, which is decolonial approaches to gender studies. I would like to build on the stress put on the significance of decolonial approaches in gender studies, but today I will approach this subject from slightly different perspective. I will demonstrate how reactionary actors in the current political conjuncture actually hijack the decolonial approaches for their reactionary, retrogressive, anti-gender agendas. And my case study to showcase this dynamic will be the Turkish context. In many populist authoritarian regimes today, anti-gender politics has become a powerful vehicle for moral governance, domestic control, and geopolitical signaling. These regimes present themselves as guardians of tradition, religion, and family, while framing feminism and LGBTI rights as ideological threats imposed by the liberal West. Turkey is often cited as a key example where authoritarian consolidation has been deeply entangled with the rise of Islamist anti-gender discourse. And here I want to reflect on how these discourses are not just about morality or national identity, but are also profoundly geopolitical, and how they strategically appropriate decolonial language to construct moral superiority. Islamist anti-gender actors in Turkey increasingly frame gender equality and LGBTI rights as Western tools of cultural imperialism. In doing so, they recast anti-genderism as a legitimate resistance against gender colonialism. This is not merely a domestic struggle, but a symbolic act of geopolitical defiance. By mobilizing terms like sovereignty, cultural authenticity, and victimhood, these actors present themselves as defenders of the Muslim world against Western domination. But to understand how this logic gains traction, we need to situate it in the longue durée of Turkish modernity. Since the late Ottoman reforms and the secular nation-building project of the early republic, gender has operated as a civilizational signifier. Reforms such as secular family law and the symbolic role of the westernized women were not only about modernization, but about signaling alignment with the West. Yet these reforms often felt imposed from above and generated resentment among conservative publics. As a result, gender became a battleground where cultural authenticity and national selfhood were contested. This ambivalence has persisted and intensified under the current Islamist authoritarian regime in Turkey. Today, anti-gender discourse in Turkey frames gender equality as not only morally corrupting, but also geopolitically invasive. Islamist actors reappropriate decolonial frames to reject gender ideology as a neo-colonial imposition that threatens the Islamic moral order. So this hijacking, or if you will, reworking of decolonial language turns feminist and LGBTI rights into markers of Western domination. Importantly, this logic is not unique to Turkey. Across the global South and East, ranging from Latin America to Russia and Eastern Europe, anti-gender movements deploy similar anti-colonialist rhetoric, casting gender norms as instruments of Western cultural imperialism. And in these contexts, opposition to gender equality becomes a way of resisting global power hierarchies. However, Turkey's case diverges in a key way, especially when compared to contexts that are geographically closer or historically intertwined with Europe. For example, unlike cases such as Russia and parts of Eastern Europe, where anti-gender discourse is framed as a corrective to European values, Turkey articulates a more rigid civilizational rupture and positions itself in ontological opposition to the West. Islamist actors articulate a civilizational difference rooted in Islam, not as a variation within Europe, but as its irreconcilable other. And this creates a rigid frontier between Islamic and Western moral orders, producing a zero-sum geopolitics of gender. Here, gender becomes the nodal point of a broader moral and civilizational struggle. This opposition is further reinforced by invoking Islamophobia as part of a larger pattern of Western hostility. Islamist actors present themselves as victims not only of cultural imperialism, but also of religious discrimination. They link gender discourse to attacks on Islamic identity with symbols like the headscarf standing in for the broader clash of civilizations. So this coupling of gendered and religious resentments feed into an aggravated victimhood narrative. Within this framework, only Muslim actors, framed as doubly oppressed, are seen as having the moral authority to resist gender ideology. But rather than offering a genuine decolonial critique, this narrative simply reproduces hierarchies by essentializing the West as corrupt and Islam as morally pure. So in this sense, anti-gender politics in today's conjuncture cannot be only seen as a reactionary backlash. It should also be understood as a geopolitical project. And this narrative in Turkey basically constructs the country, frames the country as a part of a rising global anti-gender bloc made up of nations adopting anti-gender politics as state agenda. Ultimately, this anti-gender use of decolonial frames does not aim to dismantle colonial hierarchies, rather, it retools them to justify gender oppression, politicized moral conservatism and authoritarianism. By weaponizing cultural authenticity and moral superiority, Turkey's Islamist anti-gender politics reinforces global polarization, recasts sexual politics as a front line of civilizational conflict. Thank you.